It all began with a single, suspicious letter arriving in the mailbox. Every black homeowner on our block suddenly owed hundreds, no, thousands, of dollars to the HOA. Fees that never existed, fines that never applied, only targeting us, our families, our neighbors. At first, people thought it was a mistake, a clerical error. But when the second, third, and fourth letters arrived, the community realized something far more sinister. The HOA was deliberately singling us out, testing the limits of power, hoping we would pay silently. They didn't expect us to fight back and expose the corruption to everyone. It started quietly, almost imperceptibly. One ordinary Tuesday morning, Mr. Johnson, a lifelong resident of the Maplewood community, opened his mailbox and froze. Inside was a crisp, official-looking letter with the HOA's emblem stamped in red. At first glance, it seemed routine, but the message was anything but. You are hereby notified of an additional assessment of $1,250, due within 15 days. Failure to comply will result in penalties and legal action. Mr. Johnson blinked, rereading the line. He had paid every HOA fee on time for decades. This was impossible. Across the street, Mrs. Carter, a single mother who had raised 3 children in the same neighborhood for over 20 years, discovered a nearly identical letter in her mailbox. The sum was higher, $1,800, and the tone was more threatening. She called her neighbor immediately, trying to verify if this was some clerical mistake. Within minutes, more letters arrived for other black homeowners on the block. There was one unmistakable pattern. Only black residents were being fined. Panic rippled through the neighborhood. At first, people assumed this was some administrative error. Yet the speed and precision of the charges told a different story. HOA representatives hadn't just picked random households. They had targeted the entire black community deliberately. Mr. Johnson scoured his files, comparing his past payments. Every fee he had paid in the past decade matched perfectly with HOA records, leaving no room for explanation. It was then he noticed the subtle language in the letters, extra assessments applied to properties with unverified compliance. That phrasing wasn't just vague, it was threatening, coded, a power move meant to intimidate. Within hours, the local group chat erupted. Messages flew about the unfair targeting. One homeowner shared photos of the letters, each stamped with the HOA logo, each demanding payment within 15 days. Another neighbor revealed that the HOA had ignored their repeated complaints about broken streetlights, yet they were now threatening fines for non-existent violations. The contradiction was glaring. The HOA had never enforced rules evenly, but this selective aggression crossed a line. The first twist came when Mr. Johnson's nephew, a law student, decided to dig deeper. He pulled historical property records, HOA meeting minutes, and old payment logs. It was clear these extra fees had never been voted on, approved, or legally documented. The HOA board was fabricating charges. And worse, the board had bypassed notification procedures required by the state. This wasn't just harassment, it was outright abuse of power. Within 2 hours, word spread. Some residents called the HOA office, only to be met with curt, dismissive responses. One homeowner reported a board member saying, "We enforce what we enforce, don't ask questions." The arrogance was tangible, the intent unmistakable. The HOA wanted compliance, silence, and money. They didn't anticipate scrutiny. They didn't anticipate a community ready to fight back. By the evening, the neighborhood had convened an emergency meeting at the local community center. Tension hung in the air like electricity. People shared letters, discussed patterns, and strategized. Mr. Johnson stood before a group of 20 neighbors, each holding a similar letter, each outraged, each realizing the same thing. This was not a mistake. This was systemic targeting. Just when they thought they had a grasp on the situation, another twist surfaced. The community discovered that some letters bore signatures of board members who had resigned years ago. How could they be held accountable if the supposed enforcers weren't even active? It was a bold, audacious deception, and it proved the HOA was operating in bad faith. The board was counting on fear and confusion to get compliance, thinking no one would dig deep enough to uncover the truth. As the community huddled together, Mr. Johnson received a call from a city official who had been tipped off anonymously. "We're reviewing the HOA's claims," the official said gravely. "But what we've seen so far, it's serious." Everyone looked at each other, heartbeats racing. The letters weren't just empty threats anymore. They were the opening move in a war between the HOA and a community that refused to be silenced. The HOA's fraudulent letters are now under official review, but will the community have the proof and courage to fight back? The morning after the emergency meeting, the neighborhood was buzzing with urgency. Mr. Johnson and several neighbors formed an informal task force, determined to uncover the truth behind the sudden, discriminatory fees. Each homeowner reviewed their mail, scrutinizing every word, every date, every signature. Patterns emerged immediately. The fees had been applied inconsistently, some older board members' names forged, some new charges completely fabricated. It became clear the HOA wasn't just being careless. They were deliberately targeting black residents, hoping fear and intimidation would silence them. Mr. Johnson enlisted the help of a local paralegal, Mrs. Thompson, who had grown up in the same neighborhood. She brought historical HOA documents, meeting minutes, and property deeds from decades past. What they discovered left the group speechless. The HOA had been manipulating records for years, quietly inflating fees on select properties while ignoring the rest of the neighborhood. The discrepancies weren't minor mistakes. They were calculated, systematic, and aimed directly at residents like them. As the investigation deepened, a surprising ally emerged, a former HOA accountant who had left the board months earlier. Nervously, he agreed to provide internal emails and invoices that proved the selective overcharging. Every email revealed the same attitude, board members laughing at those residents who would pay anything without question, and making plans to enforce extra fines only in their area. Shock rippled through the community as they read through the evidence. It was worse than anyone imagined. This wasn't petty harassment, it was organized financial exploitation. Meanwhile, tensions escalated within the HOA itself. Board members began meeting in secret, trying to cover their tracks. They discussed fake payment records and planned a community meeting to intimidate the black homeowners into paying without question. Yet, unbeknownst to them, every phone call, every suspicious email, every whisper of strategy was being meticulously documented by the task force. Every board move gave the neighborhood more leverage. 2 nights into the investigation, a breakthrough occurred. Mr. Johnson received a tip from an anonymous source inside the HOA, someone brave enough to leak internal communications. The messages revealed plans to audit the entire block of black homeowners, despite no legitimate authority to do so. The board was planning to send final notices with threats of liens and legal action. The community realized the clock was ticking. Every hour brought new danger of financial harm, reputational damage, and stress. Adding fuel to the fire, a neighbor noticed something in the fine print of one of the letters. Hidden clauses allowed the HOA to charge arbitrary, administrative penalties on properties that were technically in compliance. The language was intentionally vague, ensuring confusion, fear, and submission. The revelation sent shockwaves. These penalties were designed to exploit ignorance, and the black homeowners had almost been caught in the trap. Amidst all the chaos, small victories began to appear. A city council member who had grown up in the neighborhood got involved, offering legal guidance. The council member warned the HOA in a formal letter, demanding they halt all new fees until the claims could be verified. The threat of public scrutiny began to rattle the board, and the neighborhood sensed the first signs of vulnerability. Just when it seemed like progress was being made, another twist surfaced. The HOA claimed that several properties had unsigned contracts allowing extra assessments, documents the residents had never seen. Panic returned. Mr. Johnson and the task force demanded copies, only to discover that the signatures were forged. It was now irrefutable. The HOA had been creating fraudulent legal documents to intimidate and extort the black community. The residents realized the stakes were higher than ever. They weren't just fighting for financial justice. They were defending their rights, their dignity, and their neighborhood. The community started compiling video evidence, financial logs, photos, and witness testimonies, preparing a case strong enough to expose the HOA once and for all. Every homeowner was actively involved, turning fear into determination. Late that evening, as the block settled into an uneasy calm, Mr. Johnson received a call from a local investigative journalist who had caught wind of the story. "If you want this exposed publicly," the journalist said, "we'll need the documents, the letters, everything." Mr. Johnson glanced around at his neighbors, determined faces illuminated by porch lights. They were ready. The community's retaliation was about to begin. And then it happened. A subtle, almost imperceptible twist that made hearts race. A new HOA notice appeared on Mr. Johnson's door. This one was different. It was a threat unlike any before, referencing private information about his family that no HOA member should have had. Someone inside the board was watching closely, maybe even panicking, realizing the residents weren't backing down. The neighborhood now knew the HOA's corruption was deep, calculated, and personal. But just how far would the board go to stop them, and who could be trusted on the inside? The next morning, Maplewood's black homeowners were awake before the sun. Weeks of fear, anxiety, and outrage had transformed into a focused determination. Every family on the block had gathered documents, letters, emails, and videos, forming a mountain of evidence against the HOA. The sense of injustice was palpable. They weren't just fighting for money, they were fighting for their dignity, their homes, and the principle that no organization could single them out and expect blind compliance. Mr. Johnson paced in his living room, scanning his desk stacked with HOA notices. Each letter was worse than the last. Arbitrary fees, veiled threats, and references to internal records that seemed to appear out of nowhere. The HOA had tried to corner them into submission, but the community was no longer afraid. Their strategy was simple but effective: expose the HOA publicly, legally, and socially, ensuring every action would be documented. The first twist came that afternoon when a former HOA board member stepped forward publicly. In an anonymous interview, they confirmed what the task force had suspected. The extra fees were never approved in any meeting, yet the board had circulated them selectively to black homeowners, fully aware that many would pay quietly out of fear. The revelation ignited outrage far beyond Maplewood, drawing attention from local newspapers and online communities, and suddenly the HOA was no longer operating in the shadows. By mid-afternoon, a meeting was scheduled in the local community center. Every black homeowner attended, armed with copies of letters, invoices, and email screenshots. Mr. Johnson, acting as the informal spokesperson, explained the plan. First, they would file a formal complaint with the state HOA Oversight Office, challenging every fee. Second, they would leverage media attention to ensure public accountability. Third, they would gather testimonials and videos for a potential class action lawsuit if the board refused to relent. The room buzzed with excitement and a growing sense of power. Another twist struck when Mrs. Carter revealed an internal email chain she had obtained from an anonymous HOA insider. The messages outlined a chilling plan. The board had intentionally targeted black residents, using the threat of legal action as leverage to fund their own discretionary projects. It was brazen, calculated, and insulting. The emails even joked about seeing who will pay quietly and keeping them under control. The room gasped. These weren't just bureaucratic mistakes. They were acts of intentional discrimination. Every homeowner felt the tension spike as the news spread on social media. Within hours, a local journalist contacted the task force, offering to cover the story if they could verify the letters and documents. Now, the HOA faced exposure not only within Maplewood but in the broader public sphere. Panic began to ripple through the board. They had assumed silence and compliance, but the homeowners had flipped the script. The first 2 chapters of intimidation had backfired spectacularly. The next day, the first legal action began. The residents collectively submitted their evidence to the state HOA regulatory office. They meticulously documented every forged signature, every arbitrary fee, every letter threatening fines for non-existent violations. Within hours, the regulatory office confirmed that the HOA had violated several state statutes by imposing unauthorized fees and targeting residents based on selective enforcement. This confirmation was a massive victory, but it was only the beginning. Meanwhile, the HOA board, sensing the momentum shifting against them, attempted a desperate move. They sent personal emails threatening lien filings, attorney letters, and urgent payments, hoping to intimidate the homeowners back into silence. But every threat was now met with counters, filed evidence, and formal responses. The homeowners weren't reacting with fear anymore. They were acting with authority and confidence. Every move the board made only strengthened the community's case. Two major revelations arrived that afternoon. First, a city inspector verified that several fees cited by the HOA were illegal under municipal codes, making any attempt to enforce them null and void. Second, another resident uncovered historical documents proving that Black homeowners had been contributing to community maintenance far longer than the board's current members had ever existed. The irony was sharp. The HOA had been trying to punish the very people who had sustained the neighborhood for decades. By evening, the tension escalated as the board called an emergency meeting, hoping to intimidate the residents directly. But they underestimated the unity of Maplewood's Black community. When they arrived, every resident was present, standing together, displaying their evidence openly. Cameras rolled, journalists documented everything, and neighbors shared statements detailing the harassment they had faced. The HOA's threats evaporated in the face of transparency. A subtle twist arrived late that night. One of the board members attempted to quietly remove files from the HOA office, hoping to hide incriminating evidence. Unknown to them, a neighbor had installed a security camera that captured the act. Video footage of the board member sneaking through files went viral, further cementing the narrative. The HOA had been acting with deception, and now the community held absolute proof. The final hours of the conflict played out like a strategic chess match. With the evidence overwhelming, public pressure mounting, and legal enforcement in motion, the HOA capitulated. The extra fees were formally rescinded, apologies issued, and the board was subjected to state scrutiny, facing fines and mandatory oversight. The residents had won, but more importantly, they had reclaimed their power, dignity, and peace of mind. As the sun set over Maplewood, neighbors gathered in small clusters along the street, sharing stories, relief, and laughter. The ordeal had been exhausting, terrifying, and infuriating, but in the end, it had united the Black community stronger than ever. They realized that standing together, documenting every action, and refusing to be intimidated was the key to overcoming even the most corrupt of boards. Just as everyone was celebrating, an anonymous letter slid under Mr. Johnson's door. The envelope bore the HOA logo, but the contents weren't threats. Inside was a single line, "You've won this battle, but the war is far from over."